What happens when a Hollywood titan steps into a trap set by a smug talk show host? Mark Wahlberg, the gritty action star known for his no-nonsense attitude, walked onto Steven's stage expecting a routine interview. Instead, he found himself ambushed, his career and character under fire. The air crackled with hostility from the first handshake, a grip too tight, a smile too sharp. Steven, perched behind his desk like a vulture, had a glint in his eye that spelled trouble. The audience, packed into the New York studio, sensed the brewing storm, their murmurs buzzing like static before a lightning strike. Mark, dressed in a crisp black jacket, stood tall, his jaw set, ready for battle but unaware of the depth of Steven's agenda. This wasn't about promoting Mark's latest blockbuster, a gritty crime drama about a Boston cop fighting corruption. No, Steven had other plans, ones that would drag Mark's past into the spotlight and ignite a clash that would echo across America. The show began with Steven's signature smirk, his opening monologue laced with jabs at Hollywood's machismo. He didn't name Mark, but the barbs felt personal, each one landing like a dart on the guest waiting backstage. When Mark strode out, the crowd roared, expecting charm and banter. Instead, Steven leaned forward, his voice dripping with condescension. "So, Mark, you've played a lot of tough guys. Is that because you're still trying to outrun that kid from Boston who got into all that trouble?" The question hit like a sucker punch. Mark's eyes narrowed, his smile vanishing. The audience gasped, sensing the shift. Steven was referencing Mark's turbulent youth, arrests from decades ago, long buried under years of hard work and redemption. Mark leaned back, crossing his arms. "You want to talk about my past, Steven? Let's talk about yours. How's it feel to sit there judging people while you hide behind that desk?" The crowd oohed, a mix of shock and delight. Steven's face twitched, his composure cracking for a split second. The tension thickened as Steven doubled down, his tone sharp enough to cut glass. "I'm just saying, Mark, people change, sure, but folks wonder if you're still that guy who threw punches in the street." It was a low blow, twisting Mark's past into a caricature. Mark's voice dropped, low and dangerous. "You don't know me, man. You read some old headlines and think you've got my story? I've worked my ass off to be where I am. What have you done besides sling cheap shots for laughs?" The audience erupted, some cheering Mark, others stunned by his venom. Steven, unfazed, leaned closer, his eyes gleaming with malice. "Oh, come on, Mark. You're a star now, but let's not pretend you're a saint. Those headlines? They don't lie." Mark's fists clenched, his knuckles whitening. He wasn't just defending his career. He was fighting for his dignity, for the man he'd become against a host determined to tear him down. The exchange grew uglier, each man's words a blade aimed at the other's throat. Steven, relishing the chaos, pressed harder. "You talk about hard work, but isn't it true you got your big break because of who you knew, not what you did?" It was a lie, a calculated jab to paint Mark as a fraud. Mark's face reddened, his voice rising. "You're full of it, Steven. I clawed my way up, no handouts. You want to talk connections? Look at yourself, riding your network's coattails to this desk." The crowd was electric, hanging on every word, as the two men locked eyes, neither willing to back down. Steven's smirk faltered, his own insecurities pricked. He wasn't used to guests fighting back this hard. Mark, sensing the shift, stood up, towering over the desk. "You think you can drag me through the mud for ratings? I'm not your punching bag." The audience held its breath, the studio thick with the weight of their standoff. Steven, cornered, had one last card to play, and it would push Mark to the edge. Mark Wahlberg stood, his frame casting a shadow over Steven's desk, the audience frozen in a mix of awe and unease. The air in the studio felt like it could ignite with a single spark. Steven, caught off guard by Mark's defiance, scrambled to regain control, his voice sharp and venomous. "You're getting awfully defensive, Mark. Hit a nerve, did I? Maybe There's more truth to those old stories than you want to admit. The accusation hung heavy, a deliberate twist of the knife, implying Mark's past was still his present. The crowd murmured, some leaning forward, others shifting uncomfortably. Mark's eyes burned with fury, but he didn't sit back down. Instead, he stepped closer, his voice steady but laced with menace. You're trying to paint me as some thug who got lucky, but you're the one sitting there, digging up dirt for claps like a cheap tabloid hack. What's your deal, Stephen? You jealous of people who actually fought for something? Stephen's face flushed, his cool facade cracking under Mark's glare. He pushed back from the desk, standing to meet Mark's challenge, though his slight frame looked almost comical next to the actor's bulk. Jealous? Please, Mark. I don't need to scrap in the streets to prove myself. I've got this show, millions watching, and I call it like I see it. You're the one who can't handle a little truth. The audience gasped, the tension now a living thing coiling around every word. Mark laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that cut through the room. Truth? You wouldn't know truth if it slapped you. You're not calling it like you see it. You're fishing for drama, trying to make me look small so you can feel big. The crowd erupted in cheers for Mark, their loyalty shifting to the underdog who refused to be cowed. Stephen, sensing the audience slipping away, doubled down, his voice rising to a near shout. You want to talk about feeling big? Let's talk. About your movies, Mark. All those cop roles, playing the hero. Is that your way of rewriting history, pretending you're the good guy now? It was a vicious jab, questioning not just Mark's career but his integrity. The crowd hushed, waiting for the explosion. Mark's jaw tightened, his hands flexing as if restraining himself from lunging. You're pathetic, Stephen. You think you can sit there and psychoanalyze me? My movies are about real people, real struggles, something you'd never understand, sitting in your cushy studio, mocking folks who've actually lived. The words landed like blows, each one stripping away Stephen's smug armor. The audience roared, some standing, their cheers fueling Mark's fire. The confrontation teetered on the edge of chaos. Stephen, desperate to reclaim the upper hand, leaned in, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Real struggles? Come on, Mark. You're a multimillionaire playing dress-up. Spare us the working-class hero act. It was a fatal misstep. Mark's eyes flashed and he slammed a fist on the desk, the sound echoing like a gunshot. You don't get to talk about my life like it's a joke. I came from nothing, built everything, and I don't need some snide talk show host telling me who I am. The crowd was on its feet now, their cheers deafening as Stephen recoiled, his confidence crumbling. For a moment it seemed Mark might walk off, but he held his ground, staring Stephen down, daring him to push further. Stephen, rattled but unwilling to yield, opened his mouth to fire back, his next words poised to either diffuse the clash or send it spiraling into something unforgettable. Stephen's eyes darted, his mind racing to salvage his crumbling authority as the audience's cheers for Mark drowned the studio. He straightened, forcing a smirk, but his voice betrayed a quiver of desperation. You're making a scene. Mark, why so touchy? Afraid the world's gonna see the real you, not the polished movie star? The jab was meant to sting, to drag Mark back into the mud of his past, but it only fueled the fire. Mark stepped around the desk, closing the gap between them, his presence looming like a storm cloud. The real me? I'm right here, Stephen, not hiding behind a script like you. You want to talk fear? Look in the mirror. You're terrified of losing this little kingdom you've got. The crowd roared louder, their energy a tidal wave crashing over Stephen's faltering defenses. A few hecklers shouted Mark's name, their voices sharp with defiance, amplifying the chaos. Stephen, cornered, abandoned subtlety, his tone turning raw and vicious. Kingdom? I'm doing my job, Mark, asking the questions people want answered. Like why a guy with your rap sheet gets to play the hero while the rest of us have to deal with the mess you left behind. It was a reckless move, accusing Mark of dodging accountability. And the audience gasped, sensing blood in the water. Mark's face hardened, his voice low but slicing like a blade. Mess? I paid my dues, owned my mistakes, and built a life you couldn't dream of. You're not asking questions for people. You're throwing punches because you know your show's nothing without someone like me to tear down. The crowd erupted again, some clapping, others shouting, the studio a pressure cooker ready to explode. Mark's words hit Stephen like a slap, and for a moment his mask slipped, revealing raw anger. He stepped forward, jabbing a finger at Mark. You think you're untouchable because you're a star? I've got news for you. People see through the act. They know you're still that punk from the streets no matter how many movies you make. The insult was a grenade, and the audience held its breath, waiting for Mark's response. He didn't flinch, but his eyes burned with controlled rage. You're done, Stephen. You don't get to rewrite my story to prop up your ego. I'm not here for your games. He turned, as if to walk off, but paused, spinning back to face. Stephen, you want to know who I am? I'm the guy who doesn't need a desk to feel important. The crowd exploded, their cheers shaking the studio as Mark's words landed like a knockout punch. Stephen, visibly shaken, tried one last gambit, his voice shrill with desperation. Go ahead, walk off, Mark. Prove you can't handle the heat. But Mark didn't budge. Instead, he leaned in, close enough that Stephen flinched. I can handle anything you throw, but I'm not wasting my breath on a guy who's only brave behind a microphone. The audience was on its feet, their roars deafening, as the standoff reached its peak. Stephen's face twisted, his confidence shattered, but he couldn't resist one final jab, a reckless move that would either bury Mark or seal his own humiliation. The tension was unbearable, the outcome hinging on Mark's next move, as the crowd waited for the explosion that would define this clash. The studio vibrated with the crowd's roars, their energy a living pulse as Mark Wahlberg stood inches from Stephen, his gaze unyielding. Stephen, his face a mask of barely contained panic, clung to his last shred of bravado. He leaned forward, his voice a venomous hiss, loud enough for the microphones to catch. You can play the tough guy all you want, Mark, but deep down, you're still running from who you were. A thug in a fancy suit doesn't fool anyone. The words were a desperate final swing, meant to shatter Mark's armor and reclaim the spotlight. The audience gasped, some booing Stephen, their loyalty now firmly with Mark. The air felt electric, every eye locked on the two men, the clash teetering on the edge of something unforgettable. Mark's jaw clenched, but his response was calm, a low growl that carried more weight than any shout. You're out of moves, Stephen. You've been trying to break me since I walked out here, but all you've done is show everyone who you are, a small man tearing down anyone who's made something of themselves. The crowd erupted, their cheers a thunderclap, as Mark's words stripped Stephen bare. He didn't raise his voice, didn't need to. His conviction was a force, raw and undeniable. Stephen stumbled back a step, his hands gripping the desk, his eyes darting as if searching for an escape. You don't get it, do you? Mark continued, stepping closer, his presence overwhelming. I'm not running from my past. I own it. I built my life brick by brick, and no smug talk show host is going to take that from me. The audience was on its feet, their applause a tidal wave, drowning out Stephen's attempt to interrupt. He tried to cut in, his voice cracking. You're delusional, Mark. You think you're some kind of hero? You're just a... But Mark raised a hand, silencing him with a look that could stop a freight train. Save it. I'm done letting. You twist my story for your cheap ratings. The crowd roared louder, some chanting Mark's name, their voices a chorus of defiance. Stephen's face twisted with fury and humiliation, his carefully crafted persona crumbling under the weight of Mark's resolve. For the first time, he had no comeback, no snide remark to hide behind. The studio felt like a battlefield, and Mark stood as the victor, unbowed and unbroken. Mark turned to the audience, his voice steady but fierce. This guy wants to drag up old dirt. make you doubt me. But you know who I am. I'm the guy who fights, who falls, who gets back up, and I don't need his approval, or anyone's, to know what I've earned." The crowd exploded, their cheers shaking the walls as Mark gave them a nod, a gesture of gratitude and defiance. Stephen, deflated, sank into his chair, his hands trembling. He opened his mouth, but no words came. The fight was over, and he'd lost. Mark, still standing, looked ready to walk off, but his eyes held a fire that promised one final statement, a parting shot that would cement his triumph and leave Stephen's ambush in ruins. The studio pulsed with the crowd's thunderous cheers, their voices a wall of sound that seemed to lift Mark Wahlberg even taller. He stood, unwavering, his eyes locked on Stephen, who slumped in his chair, his earlier swagger reduced to a flicker of defeat. The audience's chants of "Mark, Mark" filled the air, a testament to the battle just fought. Stephen's final attempt to tear Mark down had crumbled, and now the stage was Mark's. He took a slow breath, his voice steady but carrying the weight of a man who'd faced worse than a talk show ambush and come out stronger. "You thought you could bury me, Stephen," he said, his tone calm but cutting, each word landing like a hammer. "But you forgot one thing. I don't break. I've been through tougher fights than this, and I'm still standing." The crowd roared louder, some stomping their feet, their energy a tidal wave of support. Stephen's face was pale, his hands fidgeting with a pen, his eyes avoiding Mark's. He tried to muster a response, his voice weak. "This is just a show, Mark. No need to take it personal." But the words fell flat, drowned by the audience's jeers. Mark shook his head, a faint, defiant smile breaking through. "Nah, you made it personal. You wanted to drag me down for your moment in the sun. But this ain't about you. It's about everyone out there who's ever been counted out and kept going." He turned to the audience, his arms wide, connecting with them in a way Stephen never could. The crowd surged to their feet, their applause a deafening wave, as Mark spoke directly to them. "You don't need someone like him to tell you who you are. You fight, you build, you win." Stephen, now a shadow of his earlier self, could only watch as Mark owned the room. The host's attempt to claw back control was gone, his questions exposed as petty jabs from a man desperate for relevance. Mark took a step back, his point made, his victory clear. "I came here to talk about my work, my life, but you wanted a circus," he said, his voice low but resonant. "I'm done playing your game." With that, he turned and strode toward the stage's edge, not in retreat but in triumph, his head high. The audience exploded, their cheers following him like a hero's anthem. Stephen, left alone at his desk, tried to force a smile for the cameras, but it was hollow, his defeat written in every line of his face. As Mark reached the wings, he paused, glancing back one last time. The crowd was still on its feet, their applause a roar that drowned out the show's theme music. He raised a hand, a final acknowledgement, not just of their support, but of his own resilience. He'd walked into Stephen's trap and turned it into a moment of truth, proving he was more than the past Stephen tried to weaponize. The audience knew it, and so did the millions watching at home. Mark Wahlberg didn't just survive the clash, he emerged stronger, a man who'd faced the fire and walked away unbroken. The stage lights dimmed, but the energy lingered, a story of defiance and victory that would be talked about for years.